Thank you, Mayor, members of council. As the Mayor referenced, this is the submittal of the 2014-2015 operating capital budget as required by North Carolina general statutes. In meeting with the general statutes, the budget message must explain the goals fixed by the budget. It must explain the important features of budgeted activities. It must provide reasons for changes from the previous fiscal year. In addition, this presentation will also give you a preview of the budget ordinance development schedule. So as the Mayor mentioned, the council just received this budget. They will now take the next successive 3 to 4 weeks to develop a budget ordinance that reflects and stipulates the funding for the year to come. So they will have workshops to craft that ordinance. And then when they craft the ordinance, they'll have a public hearing to get feedback on the ordinance. And then they'll be in a position to adopt the ordinance. In keeping with general statutes, they'll need to adopt that ordinance on or before July 1st. So when we talk about budget goals, what we're talking about in the City of Brevard is the City of Brevard's community development vision. That's our goal. That was created in 2012 by the City Council. And briefly, I'll just read it so everyone can get oriented with it. But the City of Brevard goal is to be a safe, friendly, family-oriented community with small-town charm, outdoor recreation, arts and culture that bring investment opportunities, environmental consciousness, and economic diversity. And how we got there was back in 2010, Council realized, and it's probably hard to remember back that far, but back in 2010 we were a much different community. We were hearing a lot of compelling stories. You should do this, you should do that. The latest fad. This is what someone else is doing it, we should do it too. The red herring, things that were symptoms rather than the causes of the issues that were within our community. Or the hot topic, things that were sensational but ultimately irrelevant. And so the more this community talked about compelling stories and latest fads and red herrings and hot topics, they were spending more and more time and money not progressing this community forward. So at the council retreat in 2010, City Council invited Phil Davis, and he communicated with council the idea of this pivot point, that you can meet the needs of a lot of different interests. You can meet the needs of economic development, you can meet the needs of community development, but you have to know what your strength is. You can pivot to serve any need, but you have to know what your strengths are. And so City Council developed a task force to do just that, to develop the strengths and the weaknesses of this community. Develop the strengths so you can understand what your opportunities are. Develop your weaknesses so you know where your threats are coming from. The branding task force was people from the entire community. They were local people who grew up here and stayed here. They were also people who moved here. They were long-term business leaders and people who just moved here and invested here. Invested here meaning invested businesses, or simply invested and created and grew their families here. And so from those meetings, the task force and then the council, as a result of the task force presentation, developed an opportunity case or rights on what they felt their strengths were. And what was said was Brevard is uniquely positioned geographically and by reason of our diverse citizenry to promote the natural, cultural, historic assets unique to this city. So you have a right. What's not pie in the sky. This is fundamental strengths that you have in this community. And then the wants and needs. So you know what you're good at. What do you want then to achieve? And what the branding task force and subsequent action by City Council said was the compelling imperative or the wants and needs of this community. Leverage those cultural and heritage hub that we have here, the outdoor opportunities, and the connectedness of the community to foster economic development and enhance quality of life. And then that led to the vision that I've already read. Council then created 2 strategies to advance upon that vision. The first strategy was foster economic development. And I'll highlight some components of this first strategy. First strategy focused on fostering economic diversity, recognizing that communities with a single employer or communities with a single type of employers are more subject to the whims of the economic cycle. So business cycles we know go up and down, and those communities that are more diverse are going to weather those economic storms rather than those that pin their hopes on a single business or a single type of businesses. But businesses in and of themselves wasn't enough. They had to be environmentally friendly. And leveraging our strengths was to attract those businesses that either utilized or were attracted to, just wanted to be near our natural assets of woods and water or our cultural assets of music, arts, and outdoor recreation. Second strategy that Council adopted was to enhance quality of life, recognizing that a strength of bringing people of all ages together through physical connections within our community, and that could be things like bike hike paths, but that could also be things like farmers markets and parks and festivals, as well as connections to our natural assets of woods and water, such as we do with the Bracken Preserve that connects us with Pisgah National Forest, or Hap Simpson, which connects us with the French Broad River, as well as connections to our cultural and historic assets of music, arts, and outdoor recreation. Those can be connections to events, those can be connections to facilities like Brevard Music Center. And so after the adoption of those two strategies, subsequent budgets, this one included, focused on how to fund those projects or those programs that were going to follow those strategies to achieve that vision. And so tonight, we'll give 3 examples of how that's going to be done in your budget. Your budget packet includes a lot more examples, but just for the sake of a synopsis, here are 3. One project that's funded in your upcoming budget is the Water Intake Alternative Analysis. And what this project does is it will develop the costs and the benefits of a variety of water intake points along the French Broad River. Now, why do we do that? Well, we fund this project because we create investment opportunities by having enough water capacity to meet future demands. You can't grow if you can't grow. We also fund this project because we promote environmental consciousness by cleaning up the French Broad River to make it safe enough to drink. In order for the French Broad River to be a resource of safe drinking water, it has to be cleaned up. By cleaning it up and keeping it protected, you make our community more environmentally conscious. And then lastly, we fund this project because we produce economic diversity by expanding existing industries through greater access and use of the French Broad River. And I mean 2 things by this last statement. The first thing I mean is this. We have businesses right now that use the river to flourish. But right now what they're using are streams and creeks, like Cathy's Creek, the various forks on the upper end of the county, Davidson River. But they have limited access to the French Broad River because the French Broad River is not clean enough to sustain what they could use. And I'm thinking of outdoor recreation businesses, such as the trout industry, such as the paddle sport industry, but as well as those education/scientific industries like our college that utilizes our water system. So that's one way we can become more economically diverse. By opening up access to the French Broad River, we allow those businesses that are water-based to grow. But there's another component of this as well. By getting more water capacity, you are supporting your land use plan for the city. And your land use plan supports a diverse growth of economic businesses within the city of Brevard. So by allowing your land use plan to grow, by giving it enough water, you are creating economic diversity. Your land use plan supports many business types, so allowing it to grow makes this community more economically sound. Another example is the Downtown Master Plan. So what this project is it rehabilitates aging streets, sidewalks, and utility lines with wider sidewalks, landscaped medians, street trees and benches, and buried power lines. So why do we fund it? We fund this project because we produce economic diversity by allowing our pedestrian-based businesses to grow. So similar example, when you talk about the trout industry, right now they're limited to the Davidson River, Cathy's Creek, and several of the forks in the upper end of the county. If you allow them to get access to the French Broad River, that business is going to grow. Right now we have several businesses within the downtown area that rely upon pedestrian activity. So I'll pick on a specific type. I'll pick on restaurants. Restaurants right now could see business improve if they had more outdoor seating, but also to have, if with wider sidewalks, you could have alcohol sales outside, and that would grow businesses. So that's a way to get economic diversity. And when you talk to economic developers, they say your greatest economic development, 70%, some of them claim, comes from growing the existing businesses that you already have. We also fund this project because we create investment opportunities when we showcase our city. So just generally speaking, if you've got a good-looking city, people that come here to visit, then come here to stay, then come here to stay permanently. It just shows off the city. But more practically, we fund this project because we create investment opportunities when we increase the marketability and lower the upgrade costs of adjacent private development. So explain in greater detail what I mean by this statement. Right now, you've got private property alongside the future downtown master plan area. And that property is in need of investment, and it's not being invested upon. And there's a couple reasons it's not being invested upon. One is because it's not showcased very well. It doesn't have a lot of street appeal. So you improve the streetscape in front of those properties, you increase the street appeal, and thereby increase the marketability to some outside developer. The other more practical way that this creates investment opportunities is if an outside developer does come in and upgrade that property, they have to take on the obligation to widen the sidewalk, pave the street, put in street lights, put in street benches, put in street trees, realign all of the underground utilities. And if this work is already done for them, as associated with the downtown master plan, it just lowers the amount of the investment and therefore sparks investment in these properties that need to be reinvested into. And then finally, we fund this project for a more symbolic, qualitative reason. We fund it because when we design things to a pedestrian scale and pace, we make a safe, friendly, family-oriented community with small town charm. And last example, farmers market performance contract. So going back on 2 years now, the city of Brevard initiated a process where no longer would they just simply hand out money to nonprofit organizations. They saw greater opportunities with these nonprofits to further economic development and community development goals that the city had, and that these nonprofits could do it more effectively and more efficiently than just adding more services within the government. And so they created performance contracts, and we've done that last year, and we're proposing it again this year for the farmers market. And what this funding or this grant will do is it will further develop the market through attainment of a 501c3 status and marketing for vendors and consumers. So what does that mean? The 501c3 status, by funding them to gain that status, not only gains them some tax protection, but that particular tax status allows them to raise revenue so they become less dependent upon grants like ours in the future. The marketing for vendors and consumers, clearly this is a new service that many people don't know about, so consumers need to become aware that we've got a farmers market. So clearly there's an advantage in marketing there, but probably the bigger benefit is marketing to the vendors. Let people know that they've got some sort of homegrown business, or if they've got an existing business and they want to just create another market, the farmers market is a way to do that. So marketing this to vendors is just as important, if not maybe more important, than marketing to consumers. And so why do we fund this? Well, we fund this performance grant because they perform. They did very well last year, and we're looking forward to another great year in the year to come. We also fund this program because we create economic diversity when we offer the opportunities and support for homegrown businesses to become sustainable. So this council may remember that back in 2012, we had a representative from the Rural Center come and talk to us about entrepreneurial businesses in rural communities. And the entrepreneurial businesses were not only the easiest way to take someone off of an unemployment line, but it also led to the quickest growth and wealth creation of bigger businesses. So you get a business that's developing some entrepreneurial good, and they grow faster and they create greater wealth than other businesses that are already up and running. And all they need is a marketplace to bring their goods to market. So the farmers market gives them that opportunity to take that homegrown business and become sustainable. And we've got several examples of that happening every week. Another thing that the farmers market does, and why we fund this program, is because we create investment opportunities when we allow opportunities for businesses to safely try spin-offs of products, and when we allow regional businesses an opportunity to expand and gain a Brevard presence. So a couple of points within that point. The first is we already have some businesses that are already up and running. They're successful. And they are small businesses, but they're trying to spin off and try to create new product lines. Farmers Market offers them an opportunity to spin that product out and just see if it becomes popular without having to take on additional infrastructure or overhead to work on an idea that they're not sure that it will take off. The other thing that happens is we have several businesses in our region, farmers in particular, that know about Brevard, but they need an opportunity, much like with a small business, to have a presence, but not necessarily want to invest at the very beginning in bricks and mortar. And so the farmers market offers them a relatively cheap opportunity to gain a Brevard presence, and then maybe become a permanent presence because of their success, the farmers market. And lastly, and this is symbolically and it's qualitatively, but it's still very important, excuse me, we fund this program because we promote environmental consciousness when people can tangibly connect where their food comes from and why it's important to protect our natural assets of woods and water. So those are three examples of projects or programs that are in the budget before you, but more importantly, why we propose funding them, because they advance upon and achieve what you've stated as goals in your community development vision. So in keeping with general statutes, give you a comparison now between this year and last year. And when we look at fiscal year 14, our general fund came in at around $9 million. Property tax, we pulled in about $4.3 million. We appropriated fund balance, and fund balance, for those not used to the idea, fund balance is essentially a savings account. And we obtain fund balance when we come under budget with a project or when we achieve operational savings by pursuing something using new technology or just doing things more efficiently. And so we use a lot of our fund balance, close to $1 million, towards particular projects in last year's budget. We also were successful in procuring a few loans to fund some equipment replacements. And sales tax was an improvement over the year before and started coming in at a little bit over $1 million. This year, the budget is less. And the reason for that is we continue to see and have concerns with a stagnant property tax base. So we're not expecting an increase in the revenue coming from the property tax base. Last year, we used an awful lot of money from fund balance to push forward and complete some necessary projects. We don't need to do that this year, and we're not recommending. So the amount of fund balance appropriated has gone down, and is one of the reasons that the general fund budget is less this year than it was last year. We did not gain any loans. Sales tax continues to increase a little bit over $100,000 than the previous year. So that's the general fund. You have two funds in your budget. Next one is the utility fund. FY14 utility fund, and the utility fund funds our water treatment and our water distribution to over 4,000 customers through 80 miles of pipeline. And then when they're done using that water, we collect that wastewater from over 4,000 customers, run it through another 80 miles of pipe to our wastewater treatment facility down here at French Broad before we clean it and release it to the French Broad River. So that's what the utility fund does. And fiscal year 14, the utility fund was about $5.6 million. We gained close to $2 million for the charges that we charge for that water. Just as a clarification for the audience in particular, the charge that we charge for the water is for the operational costs. We do not charge for capital recovery, and speaking to a misperception that there's out there, we are not making a profit. So this is just to cover the operational cost of treating and delivering the water. Likewise on sewer, collecting that wastewater and then cleaning it, we charge for the operational cost of that, and we received about $1.8 million. We started to introduce last year a capital recovery so we could start to address this issue that we need to address, which is capital depreciation. So one of the things that we did this previous year was we started to put aside money to replace all the meters within our system, and also increase our efficiencies in how we read those meters by making them not just meter replacements, but meters that could be read by radio signal. So the charges we received to replace those meters were about $130,000. And then we appropriated a little under $500,000 from our fund balance. We received $1.2 million in loan proceeds, and this largely went to improving and taking care of the sanitary sewer overflows that you're experiencing through rainfall and storm drain inflow and infiltration. So we received several loans to take care most chiefly of those sanitary lines that run through the Kings Creek Basin, which is near Brevard College. So how are things different in this coming year? Well, similarly to the general fund, the utility fund is less, and the reasons for that, we still expect the same amount of revenue from our water and sewer and meter charges. Fund balance appropriation is a little bit more, but the big difference is we have not secured loans for any particular projects in the coming year. So in keeping with the general statutes, that is the comparison between this year and last year. Now, let's give you the insight, the sausage making, as they like to say in politics, of how it was balanced. So right now, you've got a budget in front of you that reflects some preparation guidelines that I gave to staff on February 18th, 2014. And this is typically what we do when we come out of retreat with you. We get some direction, and then I in turn turn that over to staff. And there was two goals that I provided to staff. And the first goal was to focus on service delivery. If you're a public service agency, then service is your biggest commodity. And so what we wanted to do was we wanted to fund the program that we began last year, which is the Career Development and Performance Program. And what that program does is, if someone is showing leadership to provide professional, ethical, transparent, and accountable service to our citizens, then they get rewarded for that. They get bonuses. Unfortunately, because our property tax base is not growing, if we hire new positions, it cuts into our ability to reward our existing employees those merit lump sum payments. And so one of the directives during the budget preparation guidelines in February was not to include new positions in the upcoming budget. The other part of Goal 1 was for departments to submit a performance-based budget. So when you look at the individual department budgets in your budget packet, you will see things in there that talk about a department's workload indicators and performance measures. And what a workload indicator is just that. What work did we do? How much work did we do? How many potholes did we replace? How many plans did we approve? What it doesn't give you an indication of is how well of a job we did. And so that's the function of performance measures. So performance measures are, we replaced that pothole within a certain amount of time of being notified of it or seeing it ourselves. We approved those plans within a certain period of time. So you'll see that for the first year in this budget that's before you. Second goal of the budget preparation guidelines was we realized that we are in a property tax base that's not growing, but we're not going to let that flat tax base control service delivery or the discussions that we need to have related to the service delivery to our citizens. So here are some things that we gave as guidelines. Go ahead and preemptively trim budgets 3%. We know that we should expect there's going to be a 3% increase in the inflationary costs to pay our employees, as we see in the Consumer Price Index. We're going to see inflationary costs in the producer price indices to either buy equipment or buy materials such as concrete, asphalt, steel, so on and so forth. We don't want to live off savings. We used a considerable amount of savings last year, and that is okay to do when you have one-time expenses, but as everyone would know, you can't live off your savings. You either need to cut services or you need to gain more revenue, but living off of savings is just going to lead to a bad end. So that was another directive, is don't use fund balance. And if as a result the service is desired, and we are going to talk to you about some service expansions for you to discuss during your work sessions, such as expanding the fire service to evening fire service, or this idea of business co-location or one-stop shop, then we have to have a conversation with council and by extension this community that it has to come from an increased tax rate or a service cut. And we'll get into a little bit of details today, but really that's going to be the focus of your work session topics. We want to maintain infrastructure maintenance levels. As we've shared with council before, if you defer maintenance, you're increasing the cost of that maintenance. You put things off, it costs more. So at the very minimum, while we'd like to make up more ground, we don't want to lose ground that we've already made. So maintain the infrastructure maintenance levels, most notably in street maintenance. We also want to invest in projects that can grow that tax base. So the tax base stagnation is a reality, but it doesn't have to be our reality. If we can impart a change to make a change, let's do those things. So we're going to talk about some projects with you during the work sessions, talking about private property loans, talking about giving better direction to the nonprofits, moving forward with the downtown master plans and the small area plans to make these infrastructure improvements so the private sector can then get mobilized and incentivized to redevelop. And as we got from council's retreat, if there's not money to fund projects that we don't have yet underway, which is the downtown master plan phases 3 and beyond, the pedestrian plan sidewalks, or the Railroad Avenue streetscape, then let's don't move forward with it. If we don't have money to support moving forward, let's not move forward. If we need to recalibrate and reprioritize, then let's do that. So that was what the departments did. And then it came before my desk, and here's more of the internal vetting. So as a result, a fire evening service is not submitted in your budget, but we think it's a conversation you need to have, and so that's going to be a topic of one of your work sessions. In planning, the one-stop shop is not submitted, but once again, we think it's a conversation you need to have, and it'll be discussed at your next work session. Similarly, the idea of property and building reinvestment is not included. The Cherry Street bike hike path construction is not included. And under buildings and grounds, I know it's been a particular interest for some members of council to have park shelters, particularly at Franklin Park, but those are not included, as well as a recreation master plan to consider the coordination or the reassignment of our duties at the sports complex and Franklin Park are not included. But all these are things that we will talk about, and you may, as you craft your budget ordinance, decide to cut services or raise property tax rate to fund some, if any, of these projects. The public input requests that we received in March, none of the new budget requests were recommended. So if this was the first year we heard from them, we did not pass that along and include that and recommend that in the budget. And even some of the previous budget requests, we scaled back, and we really want to have a conversation to give us some more specific direction that we can give to these nonprofits. And then we also have deferred investment. So as you'll see, we're not keeping up with the price of material, equipment, and labor needs because the inflationary costs of those aspects of our operational service delivery is outpacing the growth of our property tax base. And the Career Development and Performance Pay Program, we were able to keep that preserved in rewarding employees with lump sum payments, but we weren't able to expand beyond where I would like it to be and where I think it needs to be, which is to include some merit pay adjustments to employees' salaries. So those are the things that were left off to get you a balanced budget. So the document before you, you can adopt it, but just recognize that there are some services that you and the citizens that you represent had some interest in, but are not funded in its current form. And that's why we have work sessions. Let's talk in detail about a couple of the things that were left on the cutting room floor, so to speak. The idea of no evening fire service. So this right here on the left is a chart of the calls for service that our fire department receives. So you can see from midnight up until about when people start waking up around 6 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the morning, we have relatively little calls. And we can respond to those calls in reasonable time. We have volunteer firefighters. They come into the station, they take the equipment out of the station, and they go to the scene to provide service. Given the past couple of years when we started seeing this increase from around 6 to 5, we saw a big bump in there. We funded personnel to stay at the fire station, at least 2 firefighters to stay at the station, so they could at the very least get the equipment out sooner. And we saw benefits from that. We saw our response time drop, and it was doing very well. The concern that we've got right now, and we've shared with council in our fire quarterly reports, is this after 5 volume of calls is increasing, and it's also significant. And when we take a look at our response times to those evening calls, they are not, as you would intuitively guess, not as fast as the response times to the morning and afternoon calls. And what reason that gives us concern, and when we have the work session, Chief Budzinski will get into much better detail than I can provide, is the longer it takes us to get to an incident, the higher the risk is. So this graph is too hard to read in great detail, so I'm just going to give you a synopsis. Essentially what this graph says is from this point in time, from here back, if we can get to a scene, the risk to health, safety, welfare, even the infrastructure is greatly reduced. We get to it after this, what's called a flashover event or time frame, the increase to health, safety, welfare, and the structure is dramatically increased. And so that's going to be one of the discussions we have with City Council as to what level of service do they want to get into for the evening service responding to these calls for service. Another project that was not submitted is this idea of property reinvestment. And so over the past 5 years or so, we've been monitoring since the last property tax evaluation how the property tax has been doing. And it hasn't been doing too well. 2009, we had a total valuation of all the properties within the City of Brevard limits at $920 million. By 2014, that had only increased to $960 million. That represents a growth that's not keeping pace with the inflationary costs of materials, equipment, and labor. Another property tax base for us is the Sylvan Valley 2 District. And the Sylvan Valley 2 District is a donut hole, so to speak, surrounding the City of Brevard. So we provide fire service to a portion of the county, and the county in turn charges a fire tax rate to that district to help support the fire service to that area. And we use the property valuation within that district to give us a sense of how things are going in the county. And they're not going much better. While the city saw a noticeable increase from 2009 to 2011, the property values in the county have pretty much been keeping an even keel. And so what does that mean? In Brevard, The property tax value has increased $5 million. That's about a 0.52% growth. And when you're taking a look at consumer price indices, when you're taking a look at producer price indices, particularly asphalt and fuel that are growing at anywhere between 2 and 4% each year, that 0.52% growth is just not enough to meet the demand. So to give you a tangible idea of what that means, that $5 million value increase resulted in $22,000 extra dollars coming to the city of Brevard. Now, to give you a sense of scale, we need to buy a police cruiser every year. Just by the wear and tear that they get, we have to do that just to cycle through with the miles that they get and the wear and tear that they get. By the time you get through and you get to the usage of another vehicle, you have to replace it. That $22,000 represents about 3/5 of what it takes to replace a police cruiser. And that's just one item in one department. And City Council dedicated 2 cents towards the downtown master plan last year. And so this growth of $5 million resulted in an additional $1,000 to the downtown master plan. And then looking at the Sylvan Valley 2 district, which increased $6 million in value, gained about $1,900. And for fire service vehicles that range anywhere from $700 to $1 million to replace, you can see that that's not keeping up. So when we talk about property reinvestment, we're going to talk with council about some ways that we can help accelerate the value for these properties. We have some things that we've seen in other cities that can help buildings redevelop and get more value within the tax base. We've also seen with other cities and have done here on a small scale some things that we can get properties to reinvest. And also we're seeing deferred investments. So going back to, in 2010, we shared this slide with you and we showed you the changes in the property revenue and how they compared with operating expenses. So if you take a look at the property tax rate between 2002 and 2008, it did not increase. Property value increased between 2002 and 2008 to about 20%. And that did a good job of keeping pace with the consumer price indices. So we could match what it took to pay our employees a living wage. But it was not keeping pace with what it cost to pay for chemicals, to treat the water and dispose of the water, as well as the materials like asphalt and steel and concrete to repair our infrastructure. And so in 2010, City Council increased the property tax rate by 4.5 cents. And since 2010, the value of the property tax base has bumped up between close to 2% to 0 to 0.5% that we've seen the past couple of years. In the meantime, unleaded fuel between 2010 and 2014 has increased 7%. The CPI has bumped up and down, and then asphalt's around 8%. And while the property tax base was not keeping pace with the price of materials or equipment and was lagging a little bit on the CPI, Council did some really good things over those intervening 4 years that staved off property tax increases. One of the things they did was they made those discrete service deliveries like recycling and sanitation more self-sufficient and started charging fees associated with that, but also updated the fee structure that had been created in the 1960s to reflect a more modern and more reflective fees for services. So that's one thing that was done. Another thing, through council support of health and welfare and safety programs, the premiums that the city pays and the competitiveness that the city can employ to go out and shop for insurance coverage has made us more marketable, and we've saved a considerable amount of money in that regard. And so that was another way we were able to stave off property tax increases. And the other reason we were able to stave off property tax increases is the business sector is recovering now. Is it something that you want to rely on permanently? No, because the business sector goes through business cycles. So we're seeing an uptick now, but it's a matter of time before we go through a downtick. And so the question before council, especially if it wants to consider some of these services or programs that were cut out of the budget before you, that's really what the question is. Is it time to consider a property tax increase? Is it time to consider a cut in services? Or do you just move forward and not consider those services that were left out of the budget? One of the things that we've shared with council before is what we don't want to do is we don't want to see the pavement deteriorate. This is how pavement deteriorates over time. If you repave a street between year 0 and year 18, you're going to spend about $1 comparatively on resurfacing that street. Once it gets past 18 years, you start to get into this sharp decline where you start to reinvest in the magnitude of 6 to 14 times what you would have done here. And so one of the concerns that we have, not this year, because we funded street improvements to the level that we did last year, is we're worried that if we continue to see this decline in the tax base, that we're not going to be able to keep up with our street maintenance. And if you read the Hendersonville paper, they're having this very same discussion. And so it's a discussion that you all will have as well in your upcoming work sessions. So really, when you craft the budget ordinance through work in your work sessions, it really becomes a question of what to fund. What services best meet your community's goals? We talked about fire and in planning, in buildings and grounds, the public input requests, and the deferred investments. So it really becomes a question of what best meets your community's goals, and then it becomes a question of how do you fund it. And really the equation is not that complicated. You either cut services, and while council did not like me sharing some of these in the past, they remain the same, that you cut services in special events, or you cut services by not offering recreation programs or facilities. You can even cut back on emergency response, or you can drop code enforcement. The thing that you can't do is you can't scale a service. So as an example, if you're going to provide police service, then a police officer comes with a gun and a bulletproof vest in a vehicle and a computer. You don't want to start taking, okay, you don't need the computer or you don't need the gun. I know that's a stark analogy, but that's what I'm trying to say, is that either we cut a service, but we don't scale a service. And the other option, the thing that is most in your power to control to raise revenue, is through your property taxes. So the thing that's most in your control is to raise revenue through property taxes. And as we've shared with council in the past, a 1 cent increase in property tax raises around $90,000 in revenue. And what it means to your property tax bill, if you have a $100,000 value home and property, results in $10 more a year in your property tax. If you have a $200,000 value home and property, which is the median home value for your property, it results in $20 a year, or a $300,000 home and property results in $30 more a year. And this is for properties within the city of Brevard. And then when we talk about on the utility side, I put the scale here because this gets to a discussion that you had at one of your previous work sessions. It really comes down to who pays what. And this year marks the year that you start funding towards the permitting, the design, and the construction of a new water plant. And so the discussion is going to be who pays what. Do all users pay a flat fee? And if they funded the $150,000 for the environmental, the alternatives analysis, that'd be a $3 monthly bill that everyone would pay. If you put it as a rate based upon what everyone would pay, the average user of 3,000 gallons would pay about 84 cents a month. Would you apply it as a flat fee based upon use, that hotels use more water than the average user, but not as much as campuses, and that rate would be determined by you? Or is it just to new users only, meaning that you don't need a new water plant until the new users demand it, and so do you put all that burden on them? That's a discussion for council to have. It's really a scale issue on who pays what. And so let's talk finally about the schedule that you'll have to discuss and develop and craft your budget ordinance. Well, May 19th, the budget's been submitted to you. May 27th, you'll have your first work session, and that will focus on general fund and fees, and particularly we'll talk about fire service. We'll talk about those programs in planning, whether it be co-location or capital projects or the tax base enrichment, property enrichment programs we talked about. We'll talk about recreation master planning with the county to further your discussion of maybe reassigning your duties from the sports complex to the county. And we'll just give you an update on how we're doing on providing animal control service. Then on June 2nd, your work session will focus on utility and economic development. And we'll talk about the Neely Road force main improvements. We'll talk about your water capacity project, as well as have a discussion on utility rates and fees and the economic development performance grants with nonprofits. And then what we hope to have after the June 2nd work session is a motion to prepare a budget ordinance. If you're not in a position where you feel as though you can craft a budget ordinance, we've reserved time on June 9th to have a budget reconciliation where you can craft a budget ordinance with the expectation that you could share that budget ordinance on June 16th and have a public hearing. And at that point, the conclusion of the public hearing, you're in a position to adopt the budget. And if I could just acknowledge and offer you all the opportunity to ask any questions that you may have. First of all, I'd like to thank staff for their hard work and their hard decisions. They had to do a lot of internal vetting before the budget even came to me and then came to you. I'd like to thank finance in particular. They worked very long hours and extended weeks for several weeks just to load the budget, but to assemble the document that's before you. And then as far as questions, do you have any specific questions regarding the presentation, or maybe even more importantly, what information do you need from us for the upcoming work session or work sessions? And with that, I'll take it for any questions that mayor or council may have.